story of Little Visits really began as a non-book. It began on an evening when everything went wrong. We were having Aunt Ruth over for dinner, and the juice spilled at the table. I remember this very clearly, even though it was years ago. I had to nurse the baby. Everything went wrong. And then when our oldest daughter was saying goodbye to Aunt Ruth, she said, "Aunt Ruth, I love you very, very," and she couldn't remember the word much. And it was like a 4-letter word. Christy, you can't remember the word, "I love you very, very much"? She couldn't. But that night, what happened was I wrote that down on a little scrap of paper, and I used that as our devotion for the night. The next day, our son was turning 5 months old. He was just going to be learning to crawl. And I wrote down what was happening that day, and I used that for a devotion. That was the start of Little Visits with Jesus. I wrote down on spelling lists and McDonald's napkins how God was at work in our lives during the day. And then I'd use those and make a devotion out of them at night. So years later, when people told me, "Our children did the same thing as the devotions in that Little Visits book," I said, well, of course, because our kids lived that. Our children can go through those pages of Little Visits with Jesus and see their early years. I recommend that parents, grandparents, and other adults substitute the names of your children and their friends in the devotion. That will personalize it. And when you go through the devotion and you talk about the questions at the end, or you talk about what was happening in your child's life today, write down those little squibbits, those little bits that personalize that devotion in that way. And then be sure to date it, including the year. Then when you come back to that devotion a year or 2 or 10 years later, you will get a vivid picture of what was happening in that child's life at that time. And you will see when you look back how God was so busy in that child's life from that moment of that devotion until the time when you read that devotion again.